Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View. In this first hour, we're going to spend some time talking about mental health and mental illness, what we can do inside the church, also what we can do as individual Christians. And as a program note, let me mention an hour from now, we'll also have Jeremy Dys will be in studio. Who's with First Liberty. We'll talk about a lot of these religious liberty cases. We'll also talk about the push for, after all, some kind of court packing, and maybe get into a couple other legal issues that are surfacing in our country right now. So those will be the topics that we'll be addressing about an hour from now. But we bring back to the microphone in studio with me today, Michael Perron, who is the pastor of Life Recovery at Prestonwood Baptist Church. We had originally planned to talk about a conference that was coming up, but then all the snows changed things a little bit. It was called the River Conference, but even though that happened in the past, there will be programs like that in the future. And my goal here this hour is, first of all, to help you think about this whole issue of mental health, also to think about what you can do individually for you and your family, and for those of you that are in church leadership. You may be a pastor, you may be an elder, a deacon, you just may be a member of a church. What can your church do to reach out? And as you may know, as we've had Michael here before, a former meth addict. So when he comes to this conversation, it isn't just vicariously, he's experienced it as well. So Michael, just great to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And again, we talked about this River Conference. It is something that took place last month, but you had kind of a who's who of people in the Christian world. Tim Clinton certainly was one of those individuals. You had testimonies from everybody from Sheila Walsh and Shonda Pierce, Dr. Daniel Amen, who I think very highly of, and the list goes on of the fact that you actually put together a conference at the church, which is similar to what I hope they might think about doing at other churches, to actually say, we are concerned about your mental health. And this has been a problem for certainly many years, but it's been made worse of this last year with the pandemic and the lockdown, hasn't it?
It really has been. And, one of the motivations for having this conference was to remove the stigma.
Yes.
So often what happens in the church, what happens in even culture today, is that there's a stigma associated with mental health issues. And this conference was put together in order for us to break down that wall of division between, the us and the them. We have the therapists, we have the counselors over on that side, then we have the religious leaders over on this side. What we wanted to say is, no, we need to work together, and we need to work as a unit in order to allow people to live a life of wholeness.
And again, part of the issue is not only that there's a stigma, but, okay, a lot of pastors will be honest enough to say, look, I went through Bible college, I went to seminary. If we had a course at all, it was one that, if nothing else, helped me understand I don't know anything about this, and I don't know what to do about it. And as soon as somebody comes into my office with something that's maybe I have nowhere to go, what to do, what to say, how to even go to the next step, right?
Right. And, 78% of pastors are aware that there is a mental health crisis taking place in the United States right now. Of those 78%, only 43% say that they really have any clue what to do. And so that's the reason for this conference, and that's the reason why we have the ministry that we have at our church, the Life Recovery Ministry.
And I do want to talk about that, but let's also mention that you've worked with Health and Human Services Department in Washington, D.C., and that's another part of your bio. By the way, if you would like to know more about Michael or about their Life Recovery at Prestonwood Baptist Church, which is in Texas, but if you'd like to be able to contact him because you want to pass on all the things you've been able to learn and give people a turnkey that they can actually develop, that's all there. But you've worked with the HHS, and you recognize that this is a growing problem. Can you give us an idea of how bad it is and what significant it is in terms of what's happening in our culture at large?
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, the statistics were out there that 2 in 4 people struggle with some form of an addiction, whether it be alcohol abuse or misuse, drug addiction, things of that nature. Post-pandemic, that number has moved up to 3 out of 4.
Wow.
So individuals, basically 65 to 70% of people that have said that they have an issue, it has been exacerbated by the pandemic and by the lockdowns and by the uncertainty. And I think really that's where it all stems from. It's an uncertainty of what's next.
We have booklets on everything from drug abuse, pornography, sexual abuse, those kinds of things, as well as other kinds of addictions, gambling, and on and on and on. And it does seem to me that it's almost become a nation of addicts. And there were people that were writing about that years ago, but now it's almost become a self-fulfilling prophecy, hasn't it?
It has. It's manifested itself in a variety of different ways. And much of that has to do with the separation. So we have this concept or idea that we are actually connected with individuals, but in reality, we're not. We're connected to a computer screen. We're not connected to the actual person themselves. We're connected to an image that we have to convince ourselves is that actual person.
You know, I've always said that we should keep the microphone on during the breaks, because even before the show came on, you were talking about looking at this whole issue of attachment and the difference between a screen and a person. Can you share some of that again? Because I heard it, but of course I learn so much every time I'm around you, but I want our listeners to hear about that as well.
So the attachment theory is the idea that people have to be in the presence of another person in order to feel as though they're attached.
Right.
And they did a study with infants. They put these infants in their beds, obviously, and hooked them up to a variety of different instruments in order to read their brain waves. They brought the mother in and put the mother's face in front of the infant, and the brain fired. And so they had all these readings of the baby being attached to the mother herself. They then changed it, brought a screen of the mother's face, placed that in front of the baby, and nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened at all, because the baby could not distinguish between a computer screen and the actual truth that that's not my mom, and had the capacity in order to convince itself that's actually their mother that they're talking to. So there's no recognition of attachment, which is what we were talking about before, being in the presence of other people. And as a result of that, there is a loneliness associated with that. And that's what people are going through. We have people that are more connected now than they've ever been before, but they're not connected in an interpersonal way. They're connected via social media and a variety of different aspects.
Spending all their time in front of a screen, which gets to our booklet also on social media and all the impact that it has as well. And I think it illustrates again that you have to sort of learn that behavior. We've talked about this before, that at young ages, young children sometimes don't know the difference when they're watching television between the program and the commercial. And that's not just a Saturday night a joke, Saturday Night Live joke, because, sometimes you don't know that themselves. But again, if they can't tell the difference between a screen and a person, and then gets into one of the things I've just been writing about in terms of education, putting a 10-year-old in front of a screen and thinking that that's going to be helpful in terms of education illustrates all the problems that we have right now in this very technological society.
It is. Our son when he was growing up, he played video games.
Yes.
I must confess, some of the more appropriate video games. And I can't tell you how many times I would walk by his bedroom after he was playing some shooting video game where he would yell out, "I just died." And I had to remind him, Grayson is his name. I had to say, look, that's not you.
That's not you.
We need to separate the two of these things together. But this identity that they can take in these video games really is a problem for people.
We're going to take a break, and Michael Perron with us today, and I also anticipate some of you might like to make a phone call and ask a question. If you want to remain anonymous, you can simply do that. That number is 800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. When we come back, though, I want to talk about what it took to establish the Life Recovery Ministry there at Prestonwood, the whole Exchanged Life program that you have. And so if you're in church leadership, you really want to hear this, but even in your own church, I think you might think this is something we need to develop, and that's one of the reasons why I brought Michael into the studio. So we'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
NBC anchor Lester Holt recently explained to his audience that fairness is overrated. He argued that the idea that we should always give two sides equal weight and merit does not reflect the world we find ourselves in. The example he used is certainly one that everyone would accept, that the sun sets in the west is a fact, and any contrary view does not deserve our time and attention. But he went on to expand this trivial example to larger issues, saying decisions to not give unsupported arguments equal time are not a dereliction of journalistic responsibility or some kind of agenda. In fact, it's just the opposite. Well, this claim by Lester Holt was too much for Britt Hume, who has spent decades with ABC News and Fox News. On Twitter, he observed, "This argument rests on the proposition that the media always knows the truth. But they don't, as his own network's coverage of the bogus and implausible Russian collusion tale illustrates, not to mention the media's reporting of early COVID-19 advice that turned out wrong. In his second Twitter post, he acknowledged that if one side says the White House is made of powdered milk and the other disagrees, we can safely ignore the milk claim. But political disputes are rarely cut and dried, so we report what both sides are saying and let readers and viewers make up their own minds. We can all agree that we don't need to provide an alternative viewpoint on whether the sun sets in the west or whether the White House is made of powdered milk. But the argument being used by the major media in this country is that viewers and readers do not need to see or hear an alternative view of issues ranging from the pandemic lockdowns to climate change. They believe fairness has been overrated, and that's why they frequently ignore important perspectives that don't fit their narrative. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Michael Perron with us today, and he's the pastor of Life Recovery at Prestonwood Baptist Church. And Michael, let's, if we can, talk about how you develop that. Kudos to the pastor, Jack Graham, who's been on the program with us before, for saying this is something we need to do. And you at the conference even shared that he called you up to talk about that. So start with the conversation. How did this all happen?
It was an amazing conversation. As you mentioned, I had a background in methamphetamine addiction and all of the craziness that goes along with that. No pun intended, and no offense to anybody there. But it is a world of chaos. And thankfully, by the grace of God and by some programs and people, I've been 22 years sober now. But that background led me to live a life that I have married now, I have 3 children, and was sitting around one Tuesday afternoon and received a telephone call from Jack Graham. And he said, Michael, I have an idea. And I said, well, Pastor, of course, what is that idea? He said, I'm tired of the church being the last place people go to get well. Mm-hmm. And that struck a chord with me. And I said, what did you have in mind? He said, I'm not even sure what we're going to call it, but all I know is I want people to understand and realize that Jesus Christ and his hope and his grace and his love translates to anybody out there, whether you have a mental health issue, an addiction issue, whatever, loneliness, whatever it happens to be. We want to be the church that says we're here for you, as opposed to going out into culture and receiving information that may align with some form of truth, but it's not God's truth.
And again, that was the start of a whole development now. You have various courses, but talk about, especially, you have the booklet here for Exchange Life, because that is really kind of the key, isn't it, to how to address so many of these different issues. I'll be honest, when I first started doing radio back in the 1980s, I treated everything differently. You know, drug abuse is this, and pornography is this, and gambling is this. And then I came to realize it really all kind of comes together. You know, an addiction is an addiction, and feeding the brain and the feedback mechanisms all come back to that. And then the answer is to exchange the world's view for God's view, right?
Precisely it. So we Exchange Life is a Christ-centered process that delivers, hope and support to anybody seeking a life free from the snares of sin and suffering and pain. And it's designed to help you exchange lies for trust in the truth of God's word. And so we hear lies from culture and lies from people around us. We even can not be honest with ourselves and lie to ourselves. But Exchange Life is there to take on and tackle the major elements of our identity. So we form an identity in our mind of who we're supposed to be, whether it's a boss or a father or whatever the case is. And it's necessary then to not build our life completely on that, but instead to build our life on the rock of Jesus Christ. So Exchange Life goes after exchanging the world for the kingdom of God. It talks about exchanging self-protection for trust in the truth of God's word. It talks about exchanging bondage, which we would call addiction.
Yes.
And as you mentioned before, addictions fall into one category, and that is a category of what the Bible calls bondage.
Mm-hmm.
And so it goes after the root systems as opposed to going after the branches. So many programs go after the branches. If you're an alcoholic, just stop drinking. If you're a drug addict, just stop using drugs. It never addresses the core root system. Even Alcoholics Anonymous says it's a spiritual malady. And so somewhere along the way, we've lied to ourselves, and then Exchange Life is there in order to help us exchange those lies for trust in the truth of God's word.
So again, each one of these situations is unique to the individual, but there's such a common pattern. Like I said, I used to make all these divisions between different kind of addictions, but it's the same kind of brain feedback. Of course, you had Dr. Daniel Amen there, and we now know a lot more about how the brain processes various things. We understand the addiction feedback loop, and you probably had people say before, well, you were addicted to methamphetamine, so why didn't you just stop? Well, it actually changes the brain, doesn't it?
It changes the chemistry of the brain.
Talk
exactly
about that,
right.
yeah.
So there are chemicals obviously in the brain that give you feedback, and when you use stimulants like I was using, those chemicals obviously get out of whack.
Yes.
And as a result of that, there is a point that you can reach. In other words, the Bible says, I know the good I should do, but I cannot do it.
Right.
So there's a point in our brain where the chemicals get so out of whack that we're really incapable of making the choice that we know we need to. And that's where help from therapists, help from counselors, even in the case of some people, help through medication.
Right.
We're not anti-medication at our church at all.
Right.
We want people to be able to have the capacity and the ability to really recover that life that Christ intended. And if using medication is part of that, more power to you.
Well, and again, one of the keys that I've picked up from you is accountability. And you've had individuals that you had to be accountable to in your own experience. And given back to our loneliness issue, you know, we are bowling alone. We have the Lone Ranger. Of course, even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. I mean, you think about this, there is this kind of loneliness and this kind of single idea that I have to do it all on my own. And accountability is such a key to that too, isn't it?
It really is. You know, the reality is all of us want to be known. Deep down inside, I think there's this truth in all of us that I just want somebody to know who I am and actually love me for exactly who I am. But in the world that we have today with social media, with selfies, let's just take that on right away. We have this image that we want to portray. Well, if we're struggling in any way, shape, or form, what we want to do with that is we want to hide it. We want to put it underneath a rock, don't tell anybody about it. But then we can't ever understand why we don't feel connected. It's because we have secrets. Secrets kill, ultimately. And so we hold these secrets that are near and dear to us, this go to my deathbed with this truth about my life. Life recovery is there to say, look, we're all in this thing together. And that secrets do kill. But simply because you are battling this particular issue doesn't mean there aren't others that have gone through that before you and are now willing to come back and share their experience, their strength, their hope to help that other individual out.
You know, and you started by talking about trying to break down this stigma, but it's another part of that, and that is you start these conferences. I've seen you do it before. Everyone is broken. And there is, since we were talking about social media for just a minute, it is interesting because if you think about it, what you see on Facebook or Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, all those different kinds of things, is you're seeing the highlight reels. You know, sometimes the younger generation will talk about some embarrassing things that happen, but they're kind of safe, embarrassing things. And so in a sense, everybody walks through life, even walks into church and says, Pastor looks like he's doing pretty well. Everybody, how you doing? Fine. That four-letter word, you're fine, fine. Everybody's fine, fine, fine. And you know darn well, given the numbers you just gave me, most of the people that say they're fine are not fine. But they really need to come to a point where the church provides enough vulnerability to says, you know what, we're all broken.
That's exactly right. It starts right at the top. Our pastor freely admits his struggles in his past, recent past. And as things come from the top down, It allows people the opportunity to begin sharing what's really going on in their life. Our daughter plays soccer, and she's been playing soccer for 13 years, and she's getting ready now to go to college, and so they developed this thing called a highlight reel. Mm-hmm. Well, her highlight reel is 2 minutes and 30 seconds long.
Yes.
But that's 12 years of playing soccer for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And trust me, she didn't make every save in those 12 years. She's a goalkeeper.
Yeah.
But we want to show everybody the best of who we are. And as a result of that, it gives us this false sense that really nobody cares.
Yes. Well, and the other part of that is back to Exchange Life. What you need to recognize is before I can get an understanding of truth, I have to understand some of the error. Before I understand righteousness, I have to understand my sin. And so in some respects, you do a little bit of psychological archaeology when you go through this, don't you?
You do. You go back and you identify things. You know, the solution isn't necessarily found in the past and what you are letting go of. It's really what you're taking hold of.
Right.
I encourage people to not really worry about what they're letting go of, but take hold of the truth. But there is a necessity, as the Bible says, to examine ourselves and prove ourselves, to make amends, to seek forgiveness, to make restitution. Yes, all those things are there, but that's not the answer. The true answer is believing in the identity of a child, of who you are as a child of God, that you're beloved and that you're cared for.
We're going to take a break, but let me open it up for any questions you might have. It could be a personal question. You may be saying, this is something I'm struggling with right now. Or it could be, I would certainly want to hear from some of you that are in church leadership. You might say, well, we don't really do this in the church, but I'd like to know what would be the next steps to do that. And again, we've given you some great opportunities to know a little bit more about Michael, because we have a link to the website there, and that will take you to, of course, prestonwood.org. and Life Recovery, or you can simply go to Prestonwood and find it there as well. And there are just all sorts of resources in terms of helping individuals. And so if you wanted to know more about that, we have given you that link, and I would encourage you to take the time to find out a little bit more. But let's take a break, and when we come back, let's take some of your phone calls. Maybe you've been wanting to ask that question, and we wanted to give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212 is the number to call. And again, we are focusing on, of course, the Life Recovery Program. But I might just hold this up because this is what was done a year ago at the River Conference. And I got a feeling there's another one coming up. As soon as we get the dates, we'll start promoting that, because you may want to send somebody in your congregation or some counselor you know to that so that you can equip them as well. Let's take a break. We'll continue more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Michael Perron in studio with us today, again with Life Recovery at Prestonwood. And we had our first call. He couldn't stay on the line, but I think I've got the gist of it. Calling in from South Carolina. Wanted to ask if you address some of these issues like bipolar or schizoaffective, and maybe we could define a little bit of that, but these are some serious disorders. Matter of fact, I have a daughter dealing with one of those issues, as you well know. So I'm very sensitive to that issue as well. But what, again, can the church do, and what can professionals do to help in some of those areas?
Yeah, well, what the church can do is recognize that that is a very real thing that's taking place in culture today. And so, again, getting back to the whole stigma issue, removing that idea that those people have a significant problem and they're never going to be a productive element of society. That is not a true statement at all. Mm-hmm. Now, issues that we just addressed there usually need to be referred to a professional, somebody who can help them a little bit more than the church can. We are never afraid to say that we don't have an answer for that question right now, but we can help you find the answer for your question or your issue or your problem. And then you can come back to us and we'll help you, we'll support you, we'll be there for you during the period of time in which you're recovering from that issue.
And again, I think there's a good illustration, like a paramedic who recognizes that there are certain things I can treat and certain things where I have to refer that to a doctor or hospital. Likewise, it seems to me that a pastor needs to know kind of where he fits in terms of competence, and also maybe has some trusted sources or references. And so that might be the first step in developing something that looks like a life recovery program in a church, right?
And that's what we've done for us, too. So we have all these different classes that highlight issues from anxiety and depression, from drug addiction, from issues of loneliness and anxiety. And yet there are, I should say, elements in which we recognize that this person might need a little bit more help than what we have. So what I've done is I've called around the whole DFW area. We're in Dallas, obviously.
Sure.
And I've spoken to therapists and counselors, and I've vetted them. So when somebody calls up and they say, look, this is the issue I'm going through, I have a list of people that I can send to them that I trust. I literally trust one of them with a family member.
Yes.
And so I know these individuals and I've spent time with them. So if you're a pastor, if you're a minister, I'd strongly encourage you to at least begin the process of talking to these therapists and counselors in your area. Develop that list so that when someone calls up and says, this is what's happening, you know who you're sending that person to.
And again, one of the advantages is it's not an either or. Say you go to a doctor and I do need a pill or whatever that might be. I need some kind of treatment. But again, if that's all you get, that's the wrong extreme, because there are some other things that may have led to that depression or may have led to that anxiety, that panic attack that you can address in your Exchanged Life program. True?
That's exactly right. There are studies out of the East Coast, and they indicate that if an individual comes in with depression, let's say, they receive a medication, but they do nothing to alter the rest of their existence, the rest of their life, that medication is only 53% effective. And then, unfortunately, what most people do is they think it's the medication that's not working. So they go back to the doctor, they prescribe a new medication, and the percentage of that medication helping drops from 53%, drops all the way down to about 37% on that first one. Because if nothing is done to
change,
to change the outer elements of our life and the behavior patterns that we have, nothing else is going to change. In other words, medication can help you, but it doesn't heal you. Only Christ heals you. And we have to begin changing what we choose to do throughout the course of the week.
So again, take another issue. We have quite a number of people that have served in the military that listen to this program. PTSD. Well, again, there are certain things that you can treat. They're doing everything from blinking lights to medical types of interventions and things like that. But again, some of the other issues on how that surfaced in your family are part of the family dynamic. So again, I want to try to emphasize it's not an either or, it's really a both and.
It is a both and we have a both and God, you know.
Yes.
He is not an either or God. I like to refer to him like that. But that's where the church can come alongside and undergird and support what takes place in that person's life. I often say therapy is wonderful, but what are you going to do with the other 168 hours during the week?
Yes.
And that's where the church can come in and say, well, we have this program, we have this support group, and we can love and minister to you how we can.
And that's, again, back to this issue of equal and encouragement and accountability and all the kinds of things that are necessary there. And you really have two extremes. You have one extreme where I've seen some Christians say, well, just pray about it, and I'm certainly believing that prayer is very important, but you need maybe something more than that. Or the other extreme, which simply says, well, I'm just going to give you a pill for it, I'm going to give you a drug for it, and that's it. And we recognize that we are talking about, as Christians, a holistic perspective. And so that's really what you've tried to develop there in terms of what you do there at Life Recovery, isn't it?
That's exactly right. So we have the information that we have from the Word of God, and obviously we trust the Word of God as being the ultimate truth. But then we have the truth that scientists are beginning to show us. As I mentioned before, neuroplasticity, issues with the brain. Dr. Daniel Amen, who was part of the River Conference, comes in and he does brain scans, and he can show you areas of your brain in which they've been adversely affected. And through nutrition, through exercise, through medication in some cases, that brain can begin to heal, and you can begin forming these things called neural pathways.
Yes.
And as you begin reforming neural pathways, your thought processes literally begin to change.
Since we are talking about Dr. Daniel Amen, I've been very impressed with him. And of course, you've had him at the conference, and he's now developed a clinic here in the Dallas area. My daughter has been working with the ones, I guess, in Atlanta and New York. So I've been paying attention to what he does. But anybody that ever picks up one of his books, he always has the pictures of these brains. And that's probably what was a wake-up call even for you. You look at the brain of a methamphetamine addict compared to a natural brain, and you go, whoa. Or you look at an individual that has had numerous brain trauma. This is why I want more and more of the parents and grandparents out there. Make sure that you have children and grandchildren wearing a bike helmet, maybe rethinking whether or not you really want to play contact football and a number of other things. And how many times have we seen, Michael, somebody that just simply went crazy, and they said he was fine until he played football, or he's fine until he got and of course, your daughter's played soccer, maybe concussions from soccer or whatever it might be. And so this is just another whole area where up until recently, you think about medicine, we would, if you were talking to a cardiologist, would look at the heart. If you were talking to a nephrologist, they'd be looking at the kidneys. But if you're talking to a counselor, they never looked at the brain. And he started doing these brain scans, and it's pretty scary to see what some of these very damaged brains look like, but then to see what, with the right nutrition and the right kind of sleep and all sorts of other things, can actually improve even the brain structures.
It does, like we mentioned before. And it's the brain as an organ itself is a very malleable, pliable thing. That's why your skull is one of the hardest surfaces in your entire body. It's there to protect something that's vital. And when there's damage to the brain, there can be damage to the rest of your system. And so with, as you mentioned, nutrition, a variety of different things, you can be healed. There's hope, is what I'm trying to say. In the midst of all of this stuff that we're talking about, there is hope for anybody with any type of affliction. And that hope obviously stems from your relationship with Jesus Christ, but then it carries over into other areas of your life where you can begin to recognize there's a plan for you.
There was a joke that came out of the conference, and that is everybody at the conference needs to get a brain scan from Dr. Amen because you might learn something. And there are times when we recognize that what manifests itself as some kind of psychosis, maybe even something that looks like demon possession, and then they go in and look at the brain and realize there's a tumor or there's some kind of neural pathway that's blocked or something of that nature. And so it's just, again, we are blessed to be living in the 21st century to have access to some of that technology.
A lot of times it can be an infection. It can be a particular type of virus that affects the brain adversely. And we have no idea that that is taking place. But when you can go in, have a brain scan, when you can go in and talk to a professional that actually knows the brain, the neurobiological functions of the brain, people begin to recognize it's not their fault.
Yes.
And I think that's
so
such
helpful.
A big deal for people trying to break free and live in wholeness, is the idea that it's not more faith. You don't need to pray harder. You don't need to listen to worship music 24 hours a day, although it's a good thing, 7 days a week. Mm-hmm. It's not your fault. And to remove the stigma that there's something wrong with me is a huge deal for people in recovery.
Well, we're going to take a break, and if you'd like to join the conversation, you're free to do so. I suspect many of you are just sitting back and taking notes right now, learning a few more things. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to hear it again, or I know somebody that would really benefit from this, you can go to our website right now. And of course, there's a red button that says watch or listen. You can certainly listen to that again, download a podcast and send it to someone, or watch. Of course, you can watch the live feed, or in about an hour or two, we will put it up there on YouTube. And since we have Michael in studio, you can kind of watch that and pass that on. But I would want to give everybody an assignment, and that is, if this does not exist in your church, this would be a way in which you might be able to encourage a person who's in authority. It might be your senior pastor. It might be a pastor that does ministry to the church, and let them know that there are some resources. And Michael will be glad to share that with them. And when we come back, we'll talk about all the resources that are available, but we need to take a break. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, Michael Perron with us. And again, he is with Life Recovery, Prestonwood Baptist Church. We have a link to that on the website. And Michael, I thought we might just talk for a minute about the resources that are available. First of all, you are a great resource. And last time we talked, we were kind of wondering what's going to happen with the pandemic and everything. But we seem to be coming out of that. So you would actually be available, I think, to come and speak to churches, elders, pastors, doing a conference. And so people can contact you there at Prestonwood, can't they?
They certainly can. Yeah, they can go to the Life Recovery Ministry page, and there should be a link on that page in order to get directly in contact with me. Every resource that we have, as the Bible says, there's nothing new under the sun. And so if I can save anybody the time and the effort that we've put in over the last 3 years and simply provide them a resource and then train and equip them in this ministry, I would be honored to do that. It's a kingdom thing.
And you have videos, booklets, books, all sorts of things. So talk about what is available. If somebody says, you've convinced me, we need to do this in our church, but I don't know what the next step is.
Okay, so the manuals that are available, we do an Exchange Life process Monday nights at 6:30. And you can friend me on Facebook Live. Facebook, Michael Perron, and I'll be happy to add you to the list, and you can watch the Exchange Life, and we break down the chapters. We also have materials that we've developed for a ministry called Prodigal. Prodigal is a ministry that we partnered with another church in the local area.
And I've been to that, so I can speak to it. Yes.
So the Prodigal ministry itself is there to help people navigate the chaos of somebody who's not walking with the Lord. Generally, it's a son or a daughter that maybe is struggling with some form of addiction, but many times it's a spouse. What do I do with my spouse that's not working with the Lord? But this Prodigal ministry is there to help people just really get through the chaos that can result from living with somebody who's prodigal themselves.
And again, the focus isn't so much on the prodigal as it is on the parents or the spouse struggling with, well, what did I do wrong? And, there may be some aspects that need to be addressed, but oftentimes we are free moral agents, and individuals can make choices. Sometimes you may disagree with them, but they still make those choices. So again, some great resources. And the advantage right now is that if they get on Facebook, they can watch some of those and get a little bit of a handle on it. And again, for the people in the Dallas area, they can actually go and meet you face to face. So that certainly is the case. But let's, if we can, kind of emphasize again the need, because you were giving us the facts of what happened before the pandemic, and it has taken real significant problems and made them worse in terms of addiction. I've noticed that somewhere else as well, and that is, let's say you were borderline agoraphobic. And then after an entire year, you're staying behind closed doors. And now maybe you've gotten the vaccine and everybody's saying, well, we don't have to have a mask mandate anymore in some of these states. But they're still really hesitant to go out the door. Or maybe they never really got addicted to drugs. Maybe they drank alcohol occasionally, but they were there every single day by themselves, and loneliness began to set in. It seems to me that we have always had mental health issues, but what we've been through this last year has really made them worse, hasn't they?
It has. It reinforces the lie, is what I really say to people themselves. So if there's an agreement with a particular lie, agoraphobia is a very real thing for individuals. What the pandemic has done, just based on the lockdown, is reinforced that reality for that person. And so, as we mentioned, the brain forms neural pathways. And so over the course of the last year and a half, these neural pathways have taken place. And so now they've arrived at a place where it makes sense to them to stay where they are. In the case of agoraphobia. Addictions, because individuals, have free time, let's say on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. Well, the pandemic has done something different, and it has allowed free time to be really any day of the week. And so there are no safeguards in place, is what I like to say. People have to get up and they have to go to work. Well, not so much anymore. And so it manifests and it exacerbates those problems. But again, the Life Recovery Ministry is here to help people exchange the lies for trust in the truth of God's Word. And there's hope for you. If you're out there right now and you're listening and you know somebody who's struggling, or maybe you're struggling yourself just in the middle of this day, I want to strongly encourage you to recognize that from a guy who was addicted to meth for 17 years, there is hope for you. And the hope is found in the person of Jesus Christ. If you don't know him, just say, Jesus, I need your help, and then reach out to somebody and let them know what you did.
And that's the first step, certainly allowing Christ to come into your life and to really begin to change you from the inside out. And back to this idea of hope, as you point out, you can change the neural pathways. I mean, you literally can change that so that you never are completely cured. We never want to use the word cured, but all of a sudden these temptations that caused you to not ever be able to break free of that brokenness, those chains are not on you like they were before. And so, again, there are times when you take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but nevertheless, you really can provide hope because you are a testimony, and the individuals that you've been ministering to all these years are a testimony to the fact that you really can change.
You can. It's like having a knee replacement. If you can understand the concept of a knee replacement, they are literally going in and giving you something brand new. Well, in order for the musculature and that knee to be effective, what you need to do is develop the strength around the muscles of that knee. Now, the knee will never, quote unquote, be the same, but you can get to a point where that knee sometimes often feels better than it ever felt before, but it takes discipline, it takes work, it takes energy, it takes a process where you're able to go through and say, you know what, I needed this done and it hurt for a while, but now that the pain is gone, I want to develop everything else around it so that my life can be whole.
So again, this is for the individual. One thing I thought I'd add to it is some of the things that you are dealing with are family dynamics. So there is really a need for the ministry not only to help the individual, but for example, the chaos that all surrounded your family when you went through 17 years of meth addiction. And so that's another aspect of the ministry that you have, isn't it?
It is, and there's healing, for the families around. There was a point in time in my life where my mom had to make a really tough decision.
Yes, I remember this.
Yeah, where she had to say, Michael, I love you. I carried you under my heart for 10 months, but your life and the choices that you are making have put me in a place where now I need to make this choice, that until you can start making the choices that provide life to who you are, we're going to have to step back from relationship with you.
That's incredible. And sometimes that tough love is what we need to do, isn't it? And you sometimes are encouraging parents to do that with their kids and spouses to do that with their spouses because at some point you hope that people will hit bottom so they can finally look up, right?
That's right. Compassion has 2 sides of the coin. Compassion, as we think about it, is helping another person, nurturing another person, and allowing another person to get through something. If you flip that coin over on compassion, compassion is me loving you enough to tell you the truth about how your life is affecting me. That's the way that Jesus approached people. He said, look, I see what you're doing, but I need to be compassionate and love you and care for you enough not to gloss over this and to bring it to the light and to say, you know what, let's deal with this. Let's deal with this front head on.
Michael, it's always great to have you in studio, and we'll get you back here as soon as we have a new date for the next River Conference. And then I would encourage a lot of people to put that on their calendar and try to show up for that. But in the meantime, you are available. We have our first link to you right there is to Life Recovery. It's at prestonwood.org, and you are having a very open hand, willing to share anything that you've learned with other individuals. And let's see if we can have these life recovery programs multiply all over the country.
I think that would be great. I'd value the opportunity to come and talk to anybody at any point in time.
Michael Perron with us, and again, he is pastor of Life Recovery at Prestonwood. If you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about this, or I know somebody that I think would benefit from this, first of all, click on the button that says See More. You can scroll down there and find the link to Michael. There's a place for you to contact him. There's all sorts of information, and for those of you, of course, in the Dallas area, you can actually participate in any of that, but across the country, you certainly can take advantage of that, and our vision is to really take these ideas and multiply them all over the country. So I hope you've appreciated that conversation. And as I said, if you know somebody that would benefit from this, click on that button that says listen, and you can just download the podcast. You can listen to it again or send it. But if they'd like to watch it, of course, we will have it up on YouTube very quickly, and you can pass that on to others because I know there are many other churches and pastors that need to know about that. Let's take a break. We're going to talk about religious liberty right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time talking about religious liberty. We'll get into some other legal issues as well. And we bring into the microphone Jeremy Dys, who is now listed as the Special Counsel for Litigation and Communication with First Liberty. And if you've been watching him on various news programs, you certainly have appreciated his ability to communicate so succinctly. And it's just great to have you in studio with us today.
Well, it's good to be back here. It's been a long time. I've been a little bit busy these days, so I'm glad that I could squeeze out an hour to get over here and sit down and talk with some of my favorite people.
One of the things I thought we might do is talk about something that we talked about when you weren't here, and that is we saw that there was a very interesting story that Todd Starnes talked about, and it was an Eagle Scout who was actually pulling together a memorial, and the memorial was something that was really honoring the military, and we like to do that, as you well know, Jeremy, and of course you have certainly done that at First Liberty. And then I was kind of appalled to see some of our atheist friends, in quotes, refer to it as wretched, unconstitutional, dumpster fire. And I just felt really bad that this young boy who really wanted to honor the military gets criticized because he mentions on the memorial that he put together the name's Jesus Christ. Tell us more.
I mean, look, you told the whole story, right? You got this kid who's trying to complete his Eagle Scout project so that he can get that pin at the Boy Scouts. He comes from a family who's got a long line of service to the country. I think his grandfather had been in World War II. His dad was in the military. And obviously he has his duty to country, God, and self, and all these kinds of things that the Boy Scouts and his family have taught him. And so what better way to do that than to erect this monument that says, I think it had that phrase here, and I'm going to always mess it up, so you'll have to correct me on it all, but it's only two people have died for you, mm-hmm. the Jesus Christ and the American soldier. I think it's something like that.
Yes.
You know the one I'm talking about,
sure.
Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that apparently is a bridge too far, because Mikey Weinstein, who heads up the ill-named Military Religious Freedom Foundation, gets all upset about this whole thing and sends this nasty letter to the city monument and decries this monument being there. And I mean, it's one thing to oppose a monument. It's another thing to oppose a monument that is erected by a 16, 17-year-old kid. I mean, this young man was just trying to do something efficacious for his community, just trying to do something that is helpful, that would be unique for that part of the world. And he's basically punished for it all. And it made me stop to think, like, who else is this guy bullying around the country? Mm-hmm. I mean, if he's willing to bully this kid, this 16-year-old boy or 17, I can't remember how old he was exactly, in Monument, Colorado, where else is he doing this kind of stuff? And so we had to come to the aid of the town there, and we solved it pretty quickly and pretty easily just by putting it on private property. Of course, that still is offensive to Mikey Weinstein because it still exists there.
Yes.
And they look at this as some sort of sleight of hand or whatever. It's baloney that we've got to go through this whole process, especially after we've got the clear dictates from the Supreme Court of the United States explaining to us that these religious symbols on public property pose no threat to the Constitution. In fact, they're a part of a long-standing tradition in our country, and so it should not give anyone pause for concern of any kind, let alone having to call it a dumpster fire and otherwise insult this kid who's just trying to do good things for his community.
And again, I was just thinking about this long tradition that you have had, and I appreciate your persistence, because we're talking about a cross in the Mojave Desert. We're talking about a cross of the Bladensburg Cross. We're talking about cases that have gone to the Supreme Court, and then you have to deal with some something like this, just for a poor kid who is trying to complete his Eagle Scout project, and at the same time honor those individuals who served with distinction in the military. So it is a sad commentary,
but
isn't it?
It is a sad commentary, but it's a good proof again of the dedication that we've had over the years to this issue. And it's not just First Liberty, of course, but working with the American Legion, the VFW, and towns and cities across the country to stand up for this very important principle that we're going to be able to recognize the sacrifices of our military, especially those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. And we're going to stand against people who are saying, you know what, you need to tear down that cross, or you need to remove that Star of David, or you need to otherwise sandblast those words off of that monument because they happen to be religious, as if that's some sort of, cathedral that erects on the spontaneously combusts right there in the middle of the the cemetery or the side of the road or wherever it might be because it's religious. And people, are driving by and they have to make the sign of the cross to get, keep it away from them as they, lest they be converted on the spot or something like that. This kind of bastardization of the First Amendment is something we have to fight against. And we thankfully have fought against that very well over these years. And we are now at a point where it is incumbent upon the other side to have to prove that it violates the Constitution rather than us have to prove that it doesn't violate the Constitution. And that's a great spot to be in some place we've not been in for, most of my lifetime.
Well, and again, I think that is another point that I want to make really clear today, and that is the number of victories that you have had and the fact that you've forced these issues to actually turn around. And a lot of that has to do with, of course, what we find in the Supreme Court. By the way, I already noticed the phone's ringing, so I might as well just open up the phones. You started it already. 1-800-351-1212. Kind of lost my train of thought because I've already seen the phones coming in. So if you'd like to join the conversation, agree or disagree, certainly we're talking about the military there, and we want to honor those of you that served in the military. And if nothing else, I thought I'd just pick out one that we talked about when you weren't here, but I wanted to hear your emotion a little bit on that because you certainly expressed that with some of the other interviews that you did. Let's, if we can, just before we take a break, though, mention that tomorrow at First Liberty Live, the court packing threat, what you need to know. And I thought we might just mention the fact that, of course, they can go to firstliberty.org, but you have a second website, which is firstlibertylive.com. And if people are concerned about court packing, that's something that's going to be discussed tomorrow.
It's a big deal. And Kelly is on the show tomorrow to talk about, Kelly's on the First Liberty Live show tomorrow to talk about court packing. Kelly Shackelford, I'm assuming your listeners are frequent enough with Kelly to know who Kelly is.
Yes.
But they're going to be talking about court packing. This is really a significant threat to our democracy here. And it's an effort, I think, by the left to remake our country into something the Founding Fathers did not want it to be. And so I think this effort to undermine the independence of the judiciary, it's a real threat. And I don't know that people really appreciate how very close we are to that tipping point right now. This idea that President Biden at one point called a bonehead idea, he's now seemingly behind. So we've got to be very careful about this. And I think Kelly's going to unpack that for us tomorrow.
And I do want to get into that after the break because it's morphed in different ways. For example, I watched you on television talking about, well, maybe we won't necessarily pack the court, but we'll just have term limits to this, and we'll rotate individuals around and all of that. So in some respects, when you are really blatant and saying, well, we just think that 9 justices are overworked, so maybe we need 16, people see that. But when they're talking about, well, term limits or a variety of other things, there are some other variations of that. So I want to come back and talk about what that might mean. And at the same time, where are we in terms of the possibility that enough senators would go along with something like that? And so, again, there's nothing that in the Constitution says you're only supposed to have 9 Supreme Court justices. So, and of course, who is ever paying attention to the Constitution these days? But anyway, we'll come back and talk about some of those issues. And if you'd like to join us, maybe you have some thoughts about religious liberty or what's going on in your own community. We're going to be talking about the rights of students because, of course, there are a number of cases coming down in that regard. And pretty soon we're going to have some graduations. And you know what's going to happen. Somewhere along the line, there's going to be a graduation speech or a baccalaureate or something where you're going to need to know what your rights are. So that's why we are privileged to have Jeremy with us, and we'll continue our conversation with him right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
NBC anchor Lester Holt recently explained to his audience that fairness is overrated. He argued that the idea that we should always give two sides equal weight and merit does not reflect the world we find ourselves in. The example he used is certainly one that everyone would accept, that the sun sets in the west is a fact, and any contrary view does not deserve our time and attention. But he went on to expand this trivial example to larger issues, saying decisions to not give unsupported arguments equal time are not a dereliction of journalistic responsibility or some kind of agenda. In fact, it's just the opposite. Well, this claim by Lester Holt was too much for Brit Hume, who has spent decades with ABC News and Fox News. On Twitter, he observed, "This argument rests on the proposition that the media always knows the truth. But they don't, as his own network's coverage of the bogus and implausible Russian collusion tale illustrates, not to mention the media's reporting of early COVID-19 advice that turned out wrong." In his second Twitter post, he acknowledged that if one side says the White House is made of powdered milk and the other disagrees, we can safely ignore the milk claim. But political disputes are rarely cut and dried, so we report what both sides are saying and let readers and viewers make up their own minds. We can all agree that we don't need to provide an alternative viewpoint on whether the sun sets in the west or whether the White House is made of powdered milk. But the argument being used by the major media in this country is that viewers and readers do not need to see or hear an alternative view of issues ranging from the pandemic lockdowns to climate change. They believe fairness has been overrated, and that's why they frequently ignore important perspectives that don't fit their narrative. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Jeremy Dys with us, and again, he is with First Liberty. We have information about him on the website. We're going to talk about some of these Supreme Court decisions. Matter of fact, those of you in California, it seems like Groundhog Day. Every time we turn around, we have another one of these cases, so we'll get to that in just a minute. But let me just mention that tomorrow, for those of you that would like to listen to the court packing threat, which is being done by First Liberty Live, that takes place noon Central. So it'll be, of course, 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock on the Pacific Coast, and wherever you might happen to be located. Kelly Shackelford will be part of that. And speak to this issue, if you might, Jeremy, because when we talk about court packing, it's easy to see when they want to move from 9 justices to whatever, 12, 16, whatever. But I more recently have heard you also address some of the other things that are being talked about, term limits for the Supreme Court and all sorts of other issues. So is all kind of that part of a package?
Yeah, well, as good originalists, we're going to go back and see what the words say. And the Constitution is our place to begin on all this, and that's Article 3 of the Constitution. And Article 3 is pretty scant on what what the Constitution of the Supreme Court is actually supposed to look like. It just says that federal judges will hold their office during good behavior, basically, for life. And so that's pretty. It's a mouthful, but it's not like a bookful. So it gives us a pretty clear decision as to what they're supposed to be doing and how long they get to do it for. The question mark is how they're specifically arranged and where they're arranged and that sort of thing. So the argument is that the Judiciary Act of XYZ dates These have then come and gone over the years to expand and contract the Supreme Court. Well, let's stop there for a second. Just remember that every time the Supreme Court has been expanded or contracted, and usually it would be expanded and then contracted. And for the first couple of years, it kind of went in here, I think it was 3, then 5, and then, eventually got up to 9 and a little bit bigger than that. But usually when it was expanded or contracted, it was done so for political reasons, right? There was some outgoing presidential administration. I think Adams did it on his way out the door, and Jefferson had to come back in and correct things over again. And that happened later on in the 1800s, and it stuck around at 9 since 1870-something, if I'm remembering correctly. And then it was until 19 whatever it was for FDR, 37, I think, that when he wanted to pack the court with, he was upset that the court was too old. And he was very specific about it, that these people, these old men have no idea what the young men of today's society, I mean, this is just age discrimination overtly at this point, know what they're going through, so that we need to have them forcibly retire when they reach 70 and 1/2 years of age. So my dad would not be qualified to be on the Supreme Court, would have had to retire at that point. And it actually had, so it backfired a bit, right? The Democrats, his own party, his own his own vice president, as a matter of fact, opposed it eventually.
They did. That's right.
And so it didn't go through, but it did have an effect. Remember, we have this little nursery rhyme from civics class that says the switch in time that saved 9, where there was a vote switch on the Supreme Court that basically put FDR off the path of packing the court so that his New Deal legislation would be approved and go forward. So don't discount the fact that all of this discussion is also having to do with all of that. So, right now the proposals could be, we do 11 justices or 13 or as many as the Galactic Empire, Senate Empire, whatever it might be.
Yes.
There's really no limiting principle on how many would be on
true.
there. And so that's
one
question.
Just go back and forth, too. Republicans and Democrats start doing that.
Case. Right, exactly. And that's what kind of my point was to begin with, was that when we have expanded it, it was for political reasons. Well, I think the same thing is said here as well.
Right.
That if let's just state it bluntly, if the situation had been that President Trump won re-election and he said, you know what, I think we need to expand the courts, what do you think Chuck Schumer would be saying? Right? I mean, it's pretty clear that Chuck Schumer's only in support of this because his guy's in office and that he thinks it should be going forward. So this is the Supreme Court and the judiciary as a total. The founders of our country set up to be an independent check and balance upon the other two branches of government, the executive and the legislative. Right. And so when we start making it a political body and using it for political payback, as the Senate in particular, several senators are not even like being quiet about, they're overtly saying that we should be doing that, then it ruins the independence of the judiciary. It basically allows Lady Justice to kind of lift that veil up or lift that blindfold up and look around, or maybe put her thumb on the scales of justice that she's got hanging from her sword. So, it's not a good plan for that to be the case, because it's going to ultimately hurt everybody later on. And then we get into a lot of other issues, and this is why the president has adopted this very politically helpful tool called the Commission on Judicial Reform, or on Supreme Court Reform, which that alone is a frightening, ominous, and Orwellian term, right? But they're going to study this issue as if it, again, it's a couple sentences in Article 3 and one act in the Federal Register, so it's not that hard to figure out what where to look on these things. And they're going to figure out how to reform the Supreme Court. Term limits, do we rotate them on and off? I mean, you know how great that would be. I'm sure they're going to take Justice Sotomayor off the Supreme Court and put her back on the Fourth Circuit, right? No, I don't think that's how that's probably going to work out. They're going to grab Justice Thomas or Justice Alito and push him down there and bring up a liberal judge from the Ninth Circuit and elevate him or her to the Supreme Court of the United States. So, I mean, this kind of, you have to read this commission as only a political ploy to give cover to what they actually want to accomplish, which is to adopt, to secure guidance for their legislative agenda all the way through. Just like FDR wanted to do, they want the same thing to occur here, but they're being a little bit more sneaky, but also a little bit more smart about the whole thing. So this commission is like 30 some odd people.
Yes.
There's like one or two that could even be remotely called conservative. And they're better called moderates than anything else. All the rest are these ivory-towered liberals that have been appointed by Demand Justice and other groups like that are radical on the left and that want to see this kind of thing go even further left than President Biden, I think, himself wants it to go.
So again, if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, it's happening tomorrow, since it's kind of noon Central or 1 o'clock Eastern, or even, like I said, 10 o'clock Pacific. It happens an hour before we're on here, so you could still listen to Kelly Shackelford for the hour. And then, of course, we're going to have Greg Laurie on tomorrow. We're going to talk about Greg Laurie's new book about Billy Graham. So you won't miss any point of view, and you still will benefit from that. You might want to tell some other people that are interested in this issue. But a minute ago, I was mentioning that when we look at the Constitution, I've got my Constitution right here, it doesn't say anything about having 9 Supreme Court justices. It doesn't say anything about a filibuster either. And although filibuster and packing the court are different, they're connected, because unless you change the nature of the filibuster in the Senate right now, there is no way to even remotely consider how you would end up packing the court. But if all it took were 50 votes, then all of a sudden, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, you actually have a degree from a university in West Virginia, or Kristen Sinema in Arizona become really important people, because if you could get all 50 Democrats to go along with some of this, you would have a very different kind of Supreme Court and also a very different kind of Senate.
You're right. And so I'm not going to be like Senator Whitehouse and pull out my conspiracy cards here. But, I mean, there is a bit of a logical thread that connects these things, right? And you have to kind of keep that in mind. So the debate right now is over the Equality Act and a couple other pieces of legislation, H.R. 1, all these things that have been frightening things that have gone through the United States House of Representatives on strict party line votes usually. Now they're in the Senate, where it is exactly evenly divided. And so the discussion now is, well, look, you don't have 60 votes to get over the cloture motion, the kind of the procedural, we'll call it, filibuster. And so you have to get 10 Republicans to join the Democrats, or the other way around, to get anything done in the Senate. Well, there aren't 10 senators that are willing to pass the Equality Act, or 10 Republican senators anyway. There aren't 10 Republican senators that want to go with H.R. 1. But if you could kill the filibuster, kill that cloture motion, and make it just a bare, straight-up majority vote rather than the heightened standard that the Senate rules require, well, then maybe they get a lot more things through, because they know that they've got the tiebreaker in Kamala Harris. And so that's what the effort is to go on here right now. And it really is a bit of a test balloon, because if they can get that done, not only will their legislation just be completely there's no stopping it at all. Yeah. Whatever the left wants, whatever Representative Ocasio-Cortez wants to shove through, whatever Senator Sanders wants to go through, it is red stamped by the White House. It goes right through. There is nothing that your Republican senators can really do about it at all. There's even no reasoned debate that can take place, because they won't allow for the debate. The filibuster actually slows the legislative process down helpfully, so that we get to a better piece of legislation. We saw that in the Civil Rights Act in 1965, 63, where the Republicans, what I thought was a wrongful filibuster at the time, but after, I think, 450 some hours of debate, they came out with a piece of legislation that is actually working pretty darn well these days. And so don't miss the fact that if they can kill the filibuster here, or even turn it into a talking filibuster again, there's going to be a problem later on when it comes to court packing, and because that's going to take the same kind of tie-breaking vote action that we have to get through right now.
And again, you talk about H.R. 1, you talk about the Equality Act. Of course, we can talk about whether or not we'd have new states and packing court and much, much more. But we need to take a break. By the way, if you have some comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back and talk about some of these COVID restrictions, and we'll talk about that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, Jeremy Dys in studio with us. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. You know, we have been through a year of the pandemic and the lockdown. And almost immediately, it began to be obvious that there were certain regulations coming down from various mayors and governors and others, which were necessary theoretically for the lockdown. Now we're starting to have our questions about it. But they were not applied uniformly. And I remember the first case that you dealt with out of Kentucky. But since then, you've had just a series of cases that have come out of California. So kind of where were we on this? Because in some respects, there are still individuals that are wondering whether or not they can meet in church because of COVID restrictions.
Yeah, you know, I kind of forget about this too, because my church has been meeting, for a long time now. So I feel badly for those. I had a friend of mine call me from Virginia not too long ago saying, hey, how do we go about reopening? Can you give me some advice? I'm like, move to Texas. That would be one. But if barring that, here's some other thoughts. Look, these have been they've been increasingly worse. The first one was especially egregious, though. I mean, this is the one where you had the mayor of Louisville that wanted to send out the police to record down license plate numbers, and then he was gonna send the police to their homes and force them into a 14-day quarantine period, or what we used to call house arrest, for that long. And that is just insane. I mean, this is a drive-in church service. Get in the car in your garage, windows are up, drive to your church, you park in the parking lot, the windows are still up, or maybe they're cracked a little bit so you can hear outside, and the preacher preaches through an FM transmitter to your car. This is not a high-risk situation, right? No. I mean, this is as close to hermetically sealed as you can get and still be in a car. Mm-hmm. It's just ridiculous. And yet we had to go to a federal judge and say, hey, you got people parking down at the Walmart, and you got people at Home Depot and liquor stores that are able to park out there, but they won't let us park in a church parking lot. And Judge Walker, who heard the case, the next day came out and said, yeah, this is ridiculous. No, we're not going to allow the mayor to do this kind of thing. The order is enjoined. But then it got even worse. You had a mayor, in fact, I spent Easter Sunday last year writing a complaint. I do remember that. Where on Monday, Thursday, as a matter of fact, the people at King James Bible Baptist Church in Greenville, Mississippi, there you go, African-American church down there. And the mayor down there was especially wanton in his actions. I mean, just absolutely awful on these things. He sent out the entire shift of police officers that day, and required. And they encircled the church itself with their cruisers as the parishioners there. And remember, this is an African American church in Mississippi, are now surrounded by the entire police force that day as he's holding forth on the corner there. And one of the police officers approaches the pastor and says, "Your rights have been suspended." In what country are we where your rights can be, quote, suspended? And so that began then a series of more and worse and awfuler things. And so this has now been up to the Supreme Court, I think, 6 or 8 times now.
That's why I was wondering how long.
Most of them have come through the Ninth Circuit, and I know we're all surprised that that's where that would go up through. But the Supreme Court, especially of late, fall to now, have issued repeated per curiam opinions, meaning they haven't been signed by an individual justice. They were just issued by a group, a majority of the court. And they keep on saying, no, you can't pick on religious individuals. You can't separate out religious. No, wait a minute. This last one is my favorite because Justice Gorsuch, it was in the per curiam opinion. He says, we've now addressed this 5 times from the Ninth Circuit alone.
What part are you missing?
Yeah. What part do you, like, boom, is this thing on? Yeah. Right? I mean, 5 times we've addressed this now. We think you would get it. I mean, look at the facts of this case. It's remarkable. The California said that you couldn't, or at least some subset of it, said you cannot have more than 3 families gathering for religious purposes inside one's home. Mm-hmm. Are you kidding me? You can't have more than 3 families gathered. So you could do it in a store or whatever, but you couldn't do it. It makes 0 sense whatsoever. But the response to this has been especially troubling to me as well, because the left has said, and even some places like SCOTUS Blog and others, I've seen reports on this, where people are saying, what are the justices doing here? I mean, this is crazy. They're giving some sort of preferential right to religion. Yeah, it's in the First Amendment. They say, you've got a preferential right to religion, but not to a barbecue with 3 families or more. Yeah, Yes, you have a First Amendment, not an amendment for barbecue. I don't care how great barbecue is. There is no fundamental right to host a barbecue, which, by the way, just so we're clear, because we're in Texas here, a barbecue consists of thick meats that have been smoked for hours on end, not hot dogs and hamburgers. That's a cookout for those of you north of the Mason-Dixon. The barbecue is something else entirely. But, I mean, there is no constitutional right. Is there one in Texas Constitution? There could be. But there's no federal constitutional right to a barbecue. But there is one to the free exercise of religion.
That's right.
And so, yes, doggone it, you do get preferential treatment for religious purposes here because the Constitution says you should. This isn't some sort of judge-created mentality here. It's actually written in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Well, and again, talking about preferential treatment, because we had a situation in Nevada where they said the casinos can be open, but the church can't. So they just moved the church into the casino and had a church service. And you have cannabis dispensaries and places like that can be open, but the church can't. So it wasn't just a lack of preferential treatment. It was going the other direction. And
that would be really hard for Baptists when the liquor store was open.
Yes.
So Presbyterians can meet there, I suppose. But that
you're going to get some phone calls here before we're all through, but we're having fun with that. And if nothing else, we recognize that our listeners in Michigan right now, because they're talking about, again, the director of the CDC saying, well, I don't know that we can send any more vaccines up to Michigan. It's a hot spot right now, so you'll just have to close down again. And
we're going to close down that much harder.
Yeah, as if it hasn't. And, of course, our friends in New York and California and, like you said, Virginia, a couple other places are not experiencing the kind of openness that you have in Texas, Florida, and some other places. So,
and the numbers in those states are going down.
Isn't that interesting?
I don't know.
And
even Dr. Fauci himself can't explain what's going on.
This out, Well, we can have fun with that, but I'm going to get into a couple other issues because, first of all, we have posted a very good article that came out the end of last month. Freedom of religion applies to all Americans, including our students. Now, we don't necessarily need to go through all of them, but you talk about a salutatorian in Southern California. You talk about a teacher giving assignment for PowerPoint. You've got some others talking about reading their Bible. And I thought we might, just before we take a break, just talk about this because it's getting near the end of the year. You always have some assignments that are seen as unconstitutional. You always have at least one student that would like to mention God or Jesus Christ in a valedictorian speech. So what are the rights that students might have?
Well, they have a lot of rights there. And my hope is that during the pandemic, there's been a lot of teachers, as they've been figuring out Zoom and had copious amounts of time on their hands, perhaps, they've actually picked up the Constitution and reminded themselves of these things.
There's an idea.
I don't know if that's occurred or not. But look, now that we're getting back to in-person classes again and kind of expanding that effort out, I think there's going to be some issues that are coming up because we've forgotten what this all means. But students have, let's go back to kind of the case that defines it the most, the Tinker versus Des Moines case, where it says that this is a settled principle for 90 years, and that was in 1963, I think, if I remember correctly, that it is the unmistakable holding of the Supreme Court that neither students nor teachers lose their constitutional rights, the First Amendment rights, when they walk through the schoolhouse gates. And that has not been disturbed since 1960, whatever it was.
Right.
And so we're going on like 150 years or so of clear precedent in this country that no student loses their First Amendment freedoms when they walk through the schoolhouse gates. And so the students have the most there. So they can talk about their faith and their assignments. So written assignments, oral assignments, whatever they give in class, discussions over Zoom or in person are permissible there. They can talk about it in between classes in the hallway with their colleagues. On the playground, in a gym class, whatever it might be, they can talk about their faith freely. Lunch class, or lunch period, all those kinds of things. They can reference. They can have religious clubs that gather. So if you're going to have, a chess club, or one school I remember representing had a frisbee club, and they were denying a religious club to come in there. Well, no, the Equal Access Act of 1984 says that you can, if you're going to have one, you can't deny them based upon their religious perspective there as well. And so don't let a school official tell you otherwise. You can read religious materials as class assignments as well. So if they're going to have an open assignment, free reading time, as we had one client, for one example, read whatever you want during this time, and they can't say, well, you can't read the Bible or whatever other sacred writ. No, you can. If they're going to just open it up that wide, you can read whatever you want to read on those things. And so there are more graduation time. If you're selected through merit, like as a valedictorian or through other neutral criteria, you get a chance to address your peers. Your speech is technically private speech, and so you can reference your religious faith during that time as well. Don't be intimidated by the fact that most schools will want you to submit your speech remarks ahead of time. They're usually checking for swear words and other words that might not want to be there. That's okay to exempt or to censor, but they can't censor your religious language. So if you come back, like I had a client that had black marks wherever religion was referenced, you need to call me on these things. But you've got all kinds of freedoms in school that we want to make sure you preserve.
And let me just mention, too, if you go to First Liberty, first of all, they have some really good resources on what are your rights as an employee in a particular company, what are your rights as students, teachers, and all the rest. And, of course, sooner or later, there's going to be one of those cases, and call up Jeremy, and he'll be glad to take your phone call. Let's take a break. We have a couple other issues to put on the table, and we will do that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Right, for a few more minutes, let me just mention that one of the reasons why I encourage you to support First Liberty, and I do so, and I'm not asking you to do something I don't, is because, first of all, they are standing up for our rights. And second of all, Jeremy, we've just been talking about all these successes. I mean, you are winning so many different cases. And since I'm the old guy around the table, I can remember a time not so long ago where it seemed like ACLU was winning a lot of these cases in the 1960s and 70s, and that's because because there wasn't really any countervailing force out there. But once, the American Center for Law and Justice, First Liberty, Alliance Defending Freedom, and some of these others came on the scene, but especially you in the religious liberty area, you're just winning all these cases, and you wouldn't know it if you just watched the mainstream press.
Yeah, and so much so that Adam Liptak of the New York Times recently came out and said that religious liberty is on this huge winning streak at the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yes,
they're all agog that there might be religious liberty expanding in this country. It's a great golden era right now that we're living through as a practitioner in this field. That we're living through this time right now. The Establishment Clause on the American Legion case we did a couple years ago. That overturned a piece of a bad precedent that existed from before my sisters were born. They're older than I am.
Yeah.
The lemon test. It's gone now, and I got a little dig at my sisters there. Sorry about that, but it's been around for a long time.
Right.
And so in my lifetime, and at least one of my sisters' lifetimes, we've never known the freedom that we've had since then. And so I think that's why there are so many people that are so shocked by this, because we've never known the freedom in our lifetimes that we're exhibiting right now. And so this is only going to get better, I hope.
Maybe with the Coach Kennedy case.
Exactly. When we get that case, we get other cases up there that are going to take out cases like the Employment Division versus Smith case, which is a real bugaboo in our field right now. I think it's going to make things just remarkably different here. And so we're going to have to kind of relearn, what freedom means. I was talking to my son last night about these kind of eternal battles of bad government and liberalism and what it does to you. And I was talking especially about the Soviet Union and even today Russia, how it's not a communist republic as it was back then, but it's not exactly a democratic society as it purports to be. And I said a lot of the reason for that is that those people had centuries of oppression. And when people are oppressed for generations, they don't know what freedom actually is or how to act when they get it.
Right.
And so we're really on the kind of the precipice of this right now, where we could go either way.
I think so.
And I fear that because we've never known this freedom, if we're giving it to it, we're like, no, we want to be oppressed again. Give us something else, right? That mentality is very frightening to me. And this is why I come on Point of View, and this is why I support Point of View myself, because you guys give that kind of information and train others on how to understand our freedom and possess it when we have it.
Well, again, a winning streak, so let's talk about a couple other wins. One is the Fulton case, which I don't think anybody probably knows much about, so I'll sit back and listen myself.
Yeah, this is coming up. So this is a case that's been argued at the Supreme Court by Alliance Defending Freedom, our friends over there.
Yes.
And it involves a Catholic charity in Philadelphia who is in the adoption business.
Right.
And there was a same-sex couple that came to them and wanted to adopt, and the Catholic agency said, I'm sorry, our religious traditions don't allow us to place there. Here are 45 other places where you can go. And in fact, the couple had passed, half of them on the way to the agency there. They specifically targeted that Catholic agency. And so the question mark is, well, because the city of Philadelphia partners with this Catholic charity, do they have to jettison their religious beliefs in order to conduct their charitable mission? And that's what's really at stake before the Supreme Court in that case. And Justice Alito had some really fine remarks in his briefing there, or in his argument time, saying, look, do we force a religious organization to abandon their religious tradition and force them to not only abandon the religious tradition, but then also hold to the ideological beliefs of the city? That's different than tolerance. It is now not simply fair for us to say, well, I'll tolerate what I believe is wrong behavior or wrong ideas. No, you have to now assent to ideologically opposed ideas. This is a big case for not only Catholic charities in Philadelphia, but for all religious ministries around the country. That if you partner in any way with the government, are they going to make you change? For instance, there's a lawsuit that was just filed in Oregon against the United States Department of Education. And it implicates multiple Christian colleges in the body of the complaint, but it implicates all religious colleges that take any kind of federal student aid. So if you take FAFSA at all, you're implicated in this case. And that is on the issue of Title IX on sexual orientation. And do you insist upon having your college traditional between one man and one woman, or men are men and women are women at your facilities and that sort of thing? And you get an exemption from the requirements of Title IX. And they want to remove that exemption from you. And they've, I think, found a willing accomplice in the defendant there, the Department of Education. I'm very concerned it's just going to simply take a feint on that and allow that exemption to go away. So anyway, that's where a lot of these are going. If you are going to partner in any way with the state, city, county, state, federal, Are you going to have to change who you are as an organization and the millennia of religious tradition you bring to the table in order to be a proper part of polite society?
And I would think that you would be much better in this situation with a Neil Gorsuch and a Brett Kavanaugh and an Amy Coney Barrett than even, say, 5-10 years ago.
Oh,
right?
gracious my. Yes. Thankfully, President Trump, love him or hate him, did a great job on the court. In fact, he did so well in nominating men and women to the court that the left has now besmirched his name to say that this is all court packing, that when Justice Ginsburg died and he did the presidential duty of nominating a new replacement there, that was, quote, court packing. And so they have lost their collective minds on this issue. And we're going to be paying the price for another couple years at least.
Well, a couple other issues we'd like to get to, but we're just about out of time. And I wanted to spend some time encouraging people to go to your website because, first of all, we have some of your articles. But one last time, I thought we'd also mention that tomorrow, the court packing threat, what you need to know, that takes place at noon. And again, that is an hour before we come on the air. So individuals be noon Central, of course, 1 o'clock Eastern and 10 o'clock Pacific, or wherever you happen to be in the country. And as a result, that's an opportunity to learn a little bit more about this issue of court packing, because if you can pack the court, then all these cases that are still heading down there, the Fulton case, of course, the Coach Kennedy case that you get questions about all the time, and some of those will not be resolved the right way. But at the moment, this is a really good time to be in the religious liberty area, isn't it?
It is a really necessary time to be in the religious liberty area because of so many things like that. One of the cases we didn't talk about has to do with whether or not you have to disclose your donor list as a nonprofit or religious organization. We submitted a brief to the Supreme Court on behalf of a Chinese dissident that's here in the country saying, look, if I give you my names of the people who support me, like they could be killed. Like they will suddenly take a long step off of a short staircase, right? I mean, it's an unfortunate situation where these things could occur. And so it's really dangerous. And if we need to have any kind of indication of that, just look what happened during the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. We had Senate staffers, as it turned out, doxing other senators and finding terrible information on them and making it public. Proposition 8 back, 12 years or 13 years ago now, during that time, California doxed all kinds of donors to the pro-Prop 8 campaign, all kinds of churches and religious donors to these things, and they were hounded. Churches were vandalized. In the United States, that kind of thing happens here. So if that kind of thing can happen here, it can go anywhere. Thankfully, at First Liberty Institute, we're pushing back on these things, and when we do, we are winning on these cases. And First Liberty Live is just our way to bring these stories from the front lines of our fights here so that you can see what we're doing, hear what we're doing, and partner where you're able to.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for being here. It's always great to see your face, and it's nice to come out of COVID so I can actually see you here. So again, if you would like to hear this again, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, to click on that button there that says listen or watch. Of course, you can also watch it on YouTube, which we'll put up there in about an hour, and it's all available to you. And again, you will find some of the articles that Jeremy has written or others that are part of First Liberty all on our website today, and that is at Point of View. Want to thank Doug for his ability to step in today. For Andrew, want to thank Steve as well. Hope you have a great day. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Minnesota.